I'll never be able to take you to Iran and translate for you, introduce you to my family, and show you where I'm from. None of you will ever fully see me. And it's my fault. It's because of a choice I made to report on Iran.
Salam به همگی. Welcome to this Growing Up Irooni interview with journalist Nilo Tabrizy, author of this fantastic new book that we found out has just been longlisted for the National Book Award. Now, I have to admit, when Nilo first had this book sent to me, I was really hesitant to pick it up. It is about the Zan Zendegi Azadi movement, and I wasn't sure if right now I wanted to revisit that moment. Obviously, we were all very heavily invested in what was going on at the time, and I wasn't sure if now was the time to look back. A lot has happened since then. The struggle continues, but I'm so happy that I did pick up the book and that I read it. I could not put it down once I started reading. It covers the women life freedom movement through the perspective of two different people. One is Nilo Tabrizy, who at the time was the forensic analyst, who at the time of the uprising was working at the New York Times, and Fatemeh Jamalpour, who's an Iranian journalist who was in Iran at the time covering what experiences she was going through. So the book goes back and forth between their two perspectives, and it is incredible in the way it weaves in history, Iranian history, the personal histories of the families of the women who wrote the book, and also what they were going through in the present time. Personally, as a member of the diaspora, I felt like Nilo really spoke to me as someone who has been out of the country for so long, but loves Iran so deeply. So I won't talk much more. I asked her so many questions. I'm so excited for you to hear the full conversation with Nilo Tabrizy. Enjoy. Nilo Tabrizy, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Merci, Leyla John. So excited to be here with you.
Yeah, and we were talking just very briefly before. So your book, For the Sun After Long Nights, I should have practiced that, has just come out. Is that right? When was it officially out in the world?
It came out on September 16th. So it's been out for about a month now.
And it's been nominated for the National Book Award.
Yeah, we were longlisted for the National Book Award for nonfiction, which is overwhelming. More than 600 books applied to be on the long list. They picked the top 10. So it's really moving to see the National Book Award say, hey, we want room for Iranian voices. That was a very meaningful message for us.
That's incredible. And just to talk a little bit about my experience of getting the book and reading it. So I thought, it says the story of Iran's women-led uprising. So I thought, you're a journalist, I thought it was going to be more of a journalistic look at this is what happened first, and then this was what happened, and, just a chronological timeline of things. And I think that, for my experience of women life freedom, it's just been such a grueling few years. And right after that's happened, we've gotten kind of hit with everything happening in Gaza, and it's just been a hard few years. So for me, I was like, okay, I need to brace myself to start reading this and going through this again. And also just knowing what has happened since the women life freedom movement, has it been successful? Has it not been successful? Which we'll talk about. But I was a little hesitant to read through it. But oh my gosh, it's such an incredible book, and it's so much more personal than what I was expecting. So it's, if I can summarize it a bit myself, it's you who grew up in the West, but have a lot of ties to Iran and really care about your Iranian heritage, and your correspondences and the experiences with Fatemeh Jamalpour, who's a journalist in Iran. So kind of your counterpart, you describe it as if you'd grown up in Iran, maybe that's what you would be like. And y'all have had this really beautiful correspondence throughout this whole time since before the women life freedom movement, but it really amped up during that time. You were sending messages back and forth. And so we get to go through the experience of you covering it in the West, and then her covering it from Iran. So is that kind of a good summary?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's us looking at the women life freedom movement, both from different perspectives. So one from inside Iran, one from outside Iran, and delving into our personal narratives because we come from different parts of the country, different ethnic minorities, and kind of what that means to inherit that as journalists.
Right. But then from your perspective, especially, I mean, from both perspectives, I'll start with yours. There was so much that, for example, I relate to as someone who was born in the West. I just saw myself so much in your story and, your experience of having a summer in Iran. I had exactly that as well that I would dream about for years afterwards. Like, why can't we have that where we are?
Yeah.
And always just kind of imagining myself being in these two worlds, like one foot in each world and thinking like, what would it have been like if I'd grown up there? And really, I felt a pull to really move back and I tried to. Um, and you talk a lot about that in your story, but then also from her perspective, just seeing the difficulties that she faced as someone who really wanted to be a truth teller. I think
Yeah.
none of us really have an idea of how, like, it's a life and death struggle. It's such a existential, um, I think we saw a lot of that during Women Life Freedom, especially a lot of people that hadn't been really up to date with the news or they'd been disconnected got to see that. But it's amazing seeing it through her eyes throughout this story. So I really appreciated those point of views. So if you want to talk a little bit about your friendship and what brought even the idea of the book about.
Yeah, I mean, the core of our friendship is our love for our country, our love for Iran, and the fact that we're journalists. I met Fatemeh when she was in New York. She was finishing her second master's and doing a really prestigious fellowship at the UN. So I met her, got connected with her through like a journalist coffee date. And when we met, it was just like there was such a click between us.
Mm.
And so we just kind of connected right away. And we really dreamt of trying to work with each other. So while I was at the New York Times, we tried to get her accredited to be our on the ground video journalist in Iran because she's an amazing video reporter as well. But the government just wasn't accrediting people. In fact, they were trying to kick foreign journalists out of Iran. So we couldn't get her accredited. But we always wanted to work with each other. So we wrote together first doing a partially anonymous essay with N+1, where she was the voice in Iran and I was out here in the West. And so that's kind of like we have a natural flow, and it started there. We wrote about the bloody Aban protests at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and then after Soleimani was killed by the U.S. and the Ukrainian airliner, like that was the first context that we wrote in. And then, we kept in touch despite not being able to get her accredited. And at one point, she told me, and this was 2021, she was living in London, working for BBC Persian. She found out that her father had cancer in Iran. And she wrote to me and she said, I have to go back to Iran. I know that because I worked for BBC Persian, which the Islamic Republic sees as an enemy of the state doing, propaganda. I know I'll be detained, but you're not going to hear from me. And if you don't hear from me, that means I'm safe. So that was such just a gutting. I can still feel the feeling of when she sent me the message. I can still feel my stomach drop. Like it was just so gutting to get that. And then I didn't hear from her. And I tried to connect with mutual friends, but I never heard from her. And then the protest started. And of course, I was thinking about her. But in my head, I was like, she told you she's safe. If you don't hear from her, she's safe. So I just kind of stayed there in my mind. And then one day, while I was covering the protests, which involved looking at, really graphic imagery for hours on end, it's a very difficult process. So as I'm kind of in that mood, I get an email from her, which was like, again, this incredible feeling where she said, Dear Nilu, I have been interrogated for the past year due to my reports for BBC, but I am hopeful. I'm hopeful for change. I'm hopeful for seeing you in Tehran for woman life freedom. And so getting that,
Wow.
yeah, like it felt really out of body to receive that, to one, know she's safe, and then two, feel an optimism because in the years that we spoke about Iran and what's going on, like it was always like blanketed by, the limbo that many Iranians live in under sanctions and things like that. So this is the first time I heard real optimism from her, which was such a shift. So that was incredible. And then she said, maybe this is crazy, but should we write together again? And I love that. Like it just shows her fearlessness and her, her lifelong mission to be a truth teller, right? And so, she suggested we write together. We wrote another partially anonymous essay for Paris Review. It was received really well. Like I think the dual voice, filled something in for the audience. And then from there, that's kind of where the idea from the book grew. Like very naturally based on how we'd already been working with each other and our narratives kind of bouncing off of each other too.
Wow. Well, That's another thing. Like, I think it's so important for everyone to read this because you talk about how one of the first stories that you put out for the New York Times, for example, um, everyone was writing you like writing these tweets or like mean tweets of like, why didn't you frame it like this? Why didn't you frame it like that? It's so nice to hear from her perspective what's going on over there, what she's hopeful about, and kind of the delusion that we live in the diaspora that a lot of people have, especially a lot of people. I mean, we can get into this later about the diaspora, but a lot of people had been totally unaware of like anything that had been going on in Iran for the past few decades. And then all of a sudden they came on and were like, oh, it should be like this. It should be like that. So I think that reading from her perspective of like the steps, the real life consequences that she's going through, that she's stepping through in order to get these stories out, which I want to ask you about. So you mentioned the accreditation.
Mhm.
How does that work? Accreditation. There we go.
So, if you're a journalist based in Iran working for a foreign outlet, you have to go through the Ministry of Culture, you have to go through Ershad, you have to have interviews with them, and you get a press pass essentially to work there. And so, at that moment that we were trying to apply, this was 2018, 2019, relations with US and Iran were pretty poor. The US had already unilaterally stepped out of the nuclear deal, and they just weren't accrediting people. And in fact, they were kicking people out. So the correspondent for the New York Times, eventually, we didn't have a correspondent there. I mean, the Washington Post hasn't had anyone based in the country since my colleague Jason Rezaian was our in-country correspondent, but then, was imprisoned in Evin. And so you just see the climate for being a reporter in Iran is extremely challenging. Being a foreign reporter is challenging and then limiting in another way. And so we just knew we still wanted to work with each other, but trying to get her credited formally, that just was not an option at that moment.
So then does the New York Times or Washington Post now have anyone in the country? Like what is
No,
it like now?
we don't have anyone in the country, though we have had our Persian Gulf correspondent. She has gone in, Susanna George. She went and did a short report way before the Israeli airstrikes this year, but we don't have anyone based in country at the moment.
And then you talk about in the book how you have to do all this forensic, which we all saw a lot of your forensic reporting of taking videos from Iran. Because I actually, at the time it was like, everyone was asking, why aren't more news organizations reporting on this? We're getting all this stuff on TikTok all the time so quickly. Like, why can't we just put this out there as news? But can you kind of explain the process of how and you go through this in detail in the book, but how you get videos and how you have to like look at it from different angles and make sure that they're real.
Of
Can you talk a
course.
little through that?
Yeah. So, as you said, in the first few weeks of the Woman Life Freedom, sorry, I can't even speak. I haven't had coffee. In the first few weeks of the Woman Life
You
Freedom
haven't had
Uprising.
coffee?
No,
Do you want to
no.
get coffee?
No, it's fine. Who needs to live?
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Don't even worry. But yeah, in the first few weeks of the uprising, there were videos uploaded everywhere. So there were, these Twitter accounts that would pop up and would aggregate videos that people were sharing and share them with a Western audience. People were posting from Iran to Telegram channels, to citizen journalism channels that would kind of spread it even wider. So there was a lot of media floating around. But we can't just post what we see. As reporters, we have to make sure that what we're reposting is, factual and it's of the moment, especially when we're outside the country and we have to verify it. So what that means is when we talk about verifying videos, it's less so like I don't really see a ton of manipulated videos of protests, for example. But what I will see is old videos. So someone might say this protest video is of this moment, but often it's from a few years earlier. So what we have to do is we have to make sure it's new, which involves taking screenshots in different points of the video, using Google Images to, reverse image search that and then see where it's cached, because that little screenshot is what's kind of saved in Google. So I'll search it and see when's the first time this video was posted. I'll search it on all these different, providers like Yandex, Russian Google, and things like that. And then the next step, once I feel confident that this is of the moment, I'll try to do some research. So if this is a protest that happened in Tajrish on this day, okay, can I get an understanding of what it was like before? Were people gathering? Like I just do the other reporting tools, like ask my sources. And then we'll actually try to locate the video. So what that will mean is I know that it's of this day. I know it happened around this time, but I want to know exactly where it was on a map so I can feel confident that this is, a real video. So that involves, using my Persian language skills to read signs in the background. So someone will be protesting, there'll be a highway sign. I'll look for the highway sign, and then I'll use satellite imagery or like different websites like Google Maps or Open Street Maps, and then try to actually geolocate the video and be confident that, this intersection is shown in the video and we can see that here.
Right. Okay. And another question that I have. So, so these interview series are called Growing Up Irooni. And in the book, you really tell your experiences of growing up in the diaspora and your interest in Iranian culture. So I want to go into that a bit from your perspective here. Can you tell me about your background? Like, where were you born and what was your relationship with the Persian language growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in Tehran. I have two older sisters. Both my sisters were born during the Iran-Iraq War. I was born a year after. And so right when I was born, maybe 6 months after that, my dad was able to find work in Dubai. He was an import exporter. So due to US sanctions on Iran, his business absolutely changed. And he was bringing in things like starter chemicals for paint, and, raw materials. So he was able to do that in Dubai. And so he shifted his business. And so we lived 6 months in Dubai, 6 months in Iran. And Persian was always my first language. That's what I learned at home. My dad did his degrees in the UK. So he also kind of spoke English to us a little bit. But I remember going to like a American preschool in Dubai for a few months before we moved to Canada. So I grew up somewhat bilingual, but in a very Iranian home. And, even to this day, I'll speak English to my mom if I'm trying to like put some distance between us intentionally. But
if you're upset, okay.
If I'm like, hey, this, like I'm trying to put distance. But, Persian is the main language that we speak at home with each other. And my parents' first language, my father was born in Tabriz. So his first language is Azeri, Turkish dialect. And he grew up speaking that, learned Farsi in school. And then he moved to Tehran when he was 10 or 11. And so he grew up in, both. For him, he said, I wasn't scared to immigrate to Canada because I already immigrated as a little kid coming from Tabriz to Tehran. And so when my parents got married and my mom moved into his home with his parents, she learned Azeri. So they spoke it together. Still at home, sometimes my parents will speak it in front of us to kind of like برنامه‌ریزی میکنن, to like make their own plans in front of us children, even though we're grown now. So yeah, I grew up in a very Iranian home and a very Tabrizi home as well.
So then when you guys were in Dubai, would you come to Iran and still go back and forth? Okay.
So my dad stayed and worked year round, but my poor dad would stay and work through the summers of Dubai, which is incredibly humid and uncomfortable. And we would live in Iran. So I was back and forth, like, constantly traveling. I think of my mom taking me on planes as a little infant and how difficult that must have been for her. But yeah, those were the first, 4 years of my life.
Okay. And then at 4, you came to Canada?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So then what was your experience growing up in Canada? Were you in a place with a lot of Iranians around, or was it very diverse, or were you feeling alone?
I definitely felt alone, which I think comes through if you read the book. But we were, Vancouver has an incredible, vibrant Persian community now. Like I will go to Persian supermarkets and try to buy something and they'll say قابل نداره, and I have to like untarof in Canada, which I love. But when we moved, we were really among the first Iranian families. Like there was maybe another Iranian girl who came later in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And then a new wave of Iranian girls that came in high school. So there was always fluctuating immigration. Even still, when I go home to Vancouver, I'll be able to, based on how people are walking, talking, what they're wearing, I can recognize, oh, this person just immigrated. That's so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love that with Vancouver. So it's a bit of a newer community, I think, probably compared to Toronto. So we were the first ones, and it was challenging. It was definitely challenging for me.
Yeah. And then did you make friends with the other Iranians? Like as you were growing up, did you feel connected with them, or was it more of a?
Kind of. I mean, I remember my first Iranian friend was this wonderful girl in high school named Pareen, and we had a terrible punk band with each other. She played drums, I played bass. But the new girls that came from Iran when I was in grade 9, I was so excited. And they were like, oh, like you're Western. I was like, oh, well, that's, shoot, lost again. So it was actually difficult for me to find my community of Iranians like me. In the sense of like Pareen was my first Iranian friend in that way, in the sense of like we grew up in a similar way, we're connected in a similar way, but we have enough distance from our home country that we can kind of see each other in a more similar diaspora experience.
So what do you feel like drew you? Well, you talk about this one experience of the summer in Iran, but what was it that really like drew you to Iranian culture? Like, do you feel like, or did you have more experiences visiting, or what was your relationship with Iran and Persian and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved our culture. Like my parents, I feel like this book is also a love letter to my family because they're so wonderful and have created like such a great way for me to engage with my culture. Like I feel really lucky that I always spoke Farsi with my mom growing up. And, you know, if I wanted to be sick home from school because I didn't want to go to school because like kids were kind of mean, I would come home and she would like put on gugush and be like, this is how you qer, you know, like it was a really like it was always a permission and an invitation to engage in the culture, which is really special. And we always did Nowruz and like Fala Hafez. My mom would do Fala Qahve to me growing up all the time. So I grew up in a very like cultural home. And so I think I was just driven to understand more. Like I wanted more of that. I never knew the experience of blending in. Like I always felt like anywhere I went in Canada or New York, I always feel like people are trying to like clock and my ethnicity, where does she fit in? Like I always felt like I stood out in a way. Like even in my family, my two sisters who are older than me, they had each other and I was just kind of like by myself living this different experience as a younger immigrant. And not having really the words to even express it, just like the feeling of like, oh, I have a tummy ache. I need to come home. And it's like, oh, that's just you're having like childhood anxiety because like it's stressful to be, you know, the only Iranian person in this environment or just to feel so different. So I wanted to feel what it was like to blend in. Like that was always an experience I never had. And so when I went to Iran that summer, which was amazing, and I got to spend time with my cousins and I also learned that I can't blend in there. Like they would be like, "Oh, you have such a funny accent." And I was like, "I do. What do you mean?" And like I would blend in until I opened my mouth. But even then, I was like, I was wearing like, you know, I was very wearing Western like baggy shirts and shorts and athletic sandals. Like I was not in the femme vibe of like the young girls that I played with in the neighborhood. So I was always a little bit different.
They're probably like, why are you so dehati? I had that same experience.
They're like, why are you climbing, playing hide and go seek? You could just hide. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So yeah.
Right, right. And they're like, yes, when I went, I always felt like they were like, you have the freedom to wear all this makeup and like dress like a girl and like do this. And instead you're dressing like this.
Totally, totally.
So then with your experience with meeting Fatemeh, you guys were speaking Farsi to each other, I would presume?
Yeah.
And then did you feel like you related with her? Like, since I feel like, you know, you kind of have these experiences in the West and like you're saying, like you don't even realize like how Western you become. But did you still feel like y'all had that like basis of having that relationship, the cultural roots
Yeah.
in common?
Totally. I think the thing that binded us was being able to communicate with each other. You know, like the way she expresses herself in Farsi is so beautiful and so poetic. And like one time she sent me a passage to read in Farsi. I read probably at a third grade level, so it takes me a long time to sound it out. But when I would read her in Farsi, I'm like, it's such a different experience and like a pleasure to read, you know, in Farsi in your language, how you're expressing yourself. And it's a different experience in English, of course. But we were able to speak with each other. And I think the thing that really connected us is that we love our country so much. And we do this job that is risky in a different context, of course. But like we understood that each of us has a different risks and different things that we give up in order to do this job. And so we really felt like we were bounded by a mission to platform the voices of people in our country that don't really, you know, get seen or heard that much.
Right. And there was this one part that in the diaspora discussion, this part that really resonated with me. Do you have the book with you?
Yes. Hold on.
Okay. This page kind of alongside what you're saying. Like, have you seen the play English?
Yes. I love that play.
Okay. So it's such a great expression of exactly what you're saying right now, where when we're trying to express ourselves in a different language or a different culture, it seems like the people in the play, you know, they can't express themselves fully in the other language. And she has a really good way of showing that. But this passage on page 133 that starts with, "For me," if you can read that paragraph, that I felt like that was such a great expression of this feeling that I feel like a lot of us have had.
Oh, thank you. Okay. For me, it is so special to see someone in their home element. There's nothing I appreciate more. And here I can see Martina being fully Italian. The way she's taking me around, translating for me, introducing me to her family, taking care of me, riding around together on her scooter. I've loved being here. But there's this huge part of me that is so sad that none of you will ever see me this way. I'll never be able to take you to Iran and translate for you, introduce you to my family, and show you where I'm from. None of you will ever fully see me. And it's my fault. It's because of a choice I made to report on Iran. And I don't regret it, but sometimes it just shows up like this and I feel horrible.
Oh, yeah, that resonated with me so much. It's like you can never show that full part of yourself, and it's a tragedy. And I feel like you talk a lot about that too, like these prices that we pay in general, like not being able to be there for your grandmother when she passes away, or not being able to, fully grow up with your cousins. And it's something that it's this I don't know exactly how to say it, but it's a tragedy of these like splintered lives that we lead, or a byproduct or collateral damage, maybe,
Yeah, definitely.
or just not being able to go back and have that. But then there's the experience of Fatemeh, who also can't fully obviously be herself. They've kind of taken that away from everyone in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Whether you're in the country or not. But I also really appreciate what you were saying. So getting back to kind of present time, talking about being a journalist and your feeling of partiality to what you're doing. If you can talk about that a little bit. Were you always reporting on Iran from when you first were a journalist, or was that a decision you made to start reporting on Iran at a certain point?
Yeah, so I actually never wanted to report on Iran because I always wanted to be a journalist. Like there are photos of me when I'm 4 wearing a tape recorder interviewing people, which I'm like, wow, my family has a lot of patience for that child. But I always wanted to be a reporter. I don't come from a family of writers or reporters or anything like that. But I remember very early on when I told my dad I wanted to be a reporter when we were in Canada, probably first or second grade. He said, well, you have the freedom to do that here. Like you don't have the same types of freedom in Iran. And oh, by the way, if you go to protests in Iran if you go to protests about Iran in Canada, there are people from the state that will surveil you and make it difficult for you to go back to Iran. So all of those he kind of said in the same breath, which shows
when you were in first grade.
Yeah. I know. I mean, it's just like these, just telling me very bluntly at a young age, like, to the self-surveillance starting very early, right? Like this is the consequence of, even if we don't live in the Islamic Republic, we still live under the Islamic Republic as members of the diaspora, right? So I kind of knew that early on. And especially when I moved to New York, I came here to go to journalism school. That was the first time I was meeting Iranian Americans who, first time meeting Iranian Americans and then meeting Iranian Americans who had never been back. Oh, my grandfather was an oil minister. Oh, my family were in the Tudeh Communist Party. And this is just something I never really had in my community, or if maybe people weren't even talking about it when I was younger, but this is the first time I'm encountering it. And I kind of held onto that even more tightly of like, wow, I can actually return to Iran. Like, that's so special. So I didn't want to report on Iran. And then I was working at the New York Times, and this was 2017, Trump's first administration, his first term. And the travel ban had started. And, Iranian Americans or Iranians on visas, green cards were really affected by this, right? I remember like the first hours, Iranians with green cards, some of them had, signed them away under duress at the airport. Like there was so much confusion. And I looked around and saw that I was, one of the only Iranian reporters in the room, the only one on the video team for sure. And I said, like, I just really felt like the train had come, like, the train of like, will you or won't you report on Iran had come. So I felt like it was my duty, because I could report on, fiancés on K visas who couldn't see each other, right? Because I was able to access a community of people through language and, use those skills. So I decided to do that, but I was still I was self-policing, as many of us do. I talked to my reporter friends in Iran and I asked them, what gets you in trouble? Like, what's that line? And they said, well, when you report on IRGC or corruption, it can get very sensitive. And so I went to my manager, my editor at the time, and I said, this is a big price for me. I have a lot of family in Iran. I don't feel comfortable reporting on IRGC and corruptions, but I can report on the nuclear deal, sanctions, like things that were happening that required accountability based reporting, but wouldn't necessarily be the most sensitive topics to cover. And so that's kind of how I operated. And then when in 2020, when the Ukrainian airliner was downed by accidental fire by the IRGC, that was really difficult for me because in that plane, it was a lot of Iranian Canadians. Our community is quite small. So as I started reporting, I learned that, the wife and the daughter of this man in North Vancouver who owns a bakery that I go to all the time were in that plane, my friend's cousin. Like it feels so close to home because it could have been any of us who go back and forth, and like the few airlines that, operate safely to take you to and from Iran. Right. So, and like my mom had like just been to Iran as well. So it felt too close to home. And as well, like I was working in open source reporting, which meant that people who lived near the crash site, because there were many homes near the site of where that plane crashed, would send me images from the crash site. And so like, I had like tattered Canadian passports. It was really difficult. So in that moment, I just kind of had to step away and figure out how to have a better reporting relationship. Like I still want to report on Iran. I still want to be resilient. How do I build that up? Like, how do I work in a trauma-informed sense? So I took a couple years away. And then when the movement started in 2022, right away it was anti-government. Except in the first chance we heard after Gina died from her injuries outside the Kasra hospital was Magbar dictator. So immediately like that on ramp to anti-government was like very short. And so I knew like if I report on this movement, it means I have to close the door to reporting on Iran because this is really the thing that will make it difficult for me. And so I just have to close that with confidence and kind of understand that the hopes and wishes of me, one Iranian returning, is, comparing that to how many voices need to be elevated in this moment. I just felt like the math was very clear. And so I had to do that. But it was, every time I published a story, it was just kind of a reminder of like, you can't go back. Oh, you reported on the funerals of Kurdish people who then the state killed more mourners at the funeral. Now you can't go back. Now you reported on Sistan Balochistan. Absolutely. Now you can't go back. So it was just like constant reminders of grief every time I published something.
Did you talk to your family about it before you made that decision?
No. No.
In English? Did you call your mom in English?
No, I mean, I told them when I started reporting on Iran, I said, this is something that I'm doing and I need you to support me and I need you to know I'm doing it as safely as possible. And they were like, okay. They're just like, okay, fine.
Well, it sounds like they're not very political, right?
No, I mean, like my parents, like I don't come from a political background. They weren't, involved in any type of movement. My dad, though, is like very invested in the news. Like I grew up watching BBC with him. Like, he's political in the sense that like he keeps tabs on what's going on in the country for sure, but no one's involved in anything.
Well, and just by him being like an Azeri Iranian, he kind of is forced into that position as well. Like a lot of his like life has been in politics in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or affected by politics.
Yeah, I mean, him even just speaking Azeri at home,
Right.
like that's political, right?
Exactly,
He may not see
exactly.
it that way, but it absolutely is.
Exactly.
So yeah, they still were always like fearful. Well, I read them part of the book to make sure that the story of us immigrating was accurate. And at the end of it, they were really great. They were a great audience. They gave no feedback. I was like, one rule, I don't want any feedback unless it's factual. And they abided by that. But they were concerned. They said, like, can you publish this book without your name? And I said, why? Are you scared because I write about you? And they said, no, we're your family. And if it's your name, like, we support you, like, we're there. But like, it just like could be difficult for you. And I said, well, Dad, the Islamic Republic doesn't necessarily read books, but they do read the New York Times and CNN. So that door is already closed. So like this book isn't going to really change that. And so they were very supportive.
So what about going back to, I had a few follow-up questions for what you were saying. One is the Ukrainian flight. When reports were coming out about that, how did you feel about other reporting? Like, was there anything that you saw that you were like, this doesn't, like you wanted to report on it. So I'm just saying in general, all the reports that were coming out, whether from people who are Iranian descent, who are outside of the country, or from, reports from Iran. Can you tell me, did they seem accurate to you? Did they seem in good faith? Was there anything about that reporting that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think it was a really charged moment, right? Because this was at that point the closest that U.S. and Iran had been in our lifetimes to a direct confrontation with each other. And so, as this news was coming out, I saw members of the diaspora say like this was intentional, and we'll never really be able to prove that. The New York Times, like my colleagues on the visual investigations team, they did, the landmark story that did show, missiles hitting it, and we're able to say this, reliably was an IRGC hit on this airliner. But we'll never be able to prove the intent. And so for me, that's also why I like open source reporting, because I just have to work with the material that's in front of me. And it's not really about an opinion or what this person thinks happened, or, it's just really working with the visual material. So it was a charged context to do the reporting in, for sure. And understandably, like there's so much grief in that and so much frustration of like, why would civilian airspace be open during a time of conflict? Like that just makes no sense, right? So yeah, it was a charged and difficult time.
And then what do you think was different? Because actually in 2019, I had an experience as well where, during the protest that came up, it was that the Bloody Aban
Yeah.
2019. Okay, so I retweeted some of the protests that were there that were saying like Maghba Khamenei. And I did have cousins from Iran that wrote and were like, hey, if you ever want to come back to Iran, like you have to take those down. Like they're going to, be flagged. And I did. I took them down. And I think at the time, like a lot of people were like that. That was just the atmosphere. These protests had been happening. The Green Movement had happened. There was another one in 2017. Each time it was getting kind of bigger and bigger. But what do you think the difference was between 2019 and 2022, where kind of everyone kind of went into it and did retweet all these things and what was the difference? Was it a difference with the way people in Iran were doing things, or was it a difference in the diaspora, or what changed?
I think there's a couple things. I think one, it's a difference of in the country. Like as each month passes, the economic situation for people becomes worse. Like, the quality of life, lack of jobs, it's limbo. It's like these frustrations, the daily frustrations of living in Iran continue to mount. And this desire for just wanting to live a normal life. That's what many people say to me. I just want to live a normal life. That desire increases too. So I think like, that element is there. And I think the difference was the inciting moment, right? So for the Bloody Aban protest, it was over this fuel hike. But what's behind all of a sudden fuel hike? It's government corruption and mismanagement, which is why after maybe like a week or so, I think the slogans changed, like the on ramp to here's the issue, but actually now the issue is the state. That was a longer on ramp. For what happened to Mahsa Jina Amini, like I think we saw her, right? Like we saw the image of her after she was in custody of the morality police, allegedly for improper hijab. We'll never know. She was taken in custody. And the next thing we see is this young woman and unconscious in a hospital bed. Her face is bruised and puffy. Like I can see the image. There's dried blood on her ears. Like she has clearly been beaten, pretty severely. And I think that image is what infuriated so many people, because here's this girl who's coming from Kurdistan visiting the capital. Any of us could have been her, right? Like any of us could have been her. And I think the fact that we could all see ourselves in Gina's experience and how casual, like when you meet up with a friend in Iran in a cafe, women will ask each other, Kasi girdad, did anyone hassle you on your way? That's asking if the morality police has hassled you. Like, because it's just a daily feature of life. My friends will drive without their hijab in Tehran, their car might be impounded, right? So it's just like these mounting assaults on women in different ways by the state. And I think once we saw how severely Gina was beaten, and then she succumbed to her injuries a few days after, like that just enraged people. Like the cruelty that the state can casually dispose of a young woman, and any of us could see ourselves in her, like that, I think was infuriating on top of the mounting pressures of living in Iran.
Right. And I think for me too, like having visited Iran and just coming from the West, and you'd visit for a short period of time, it was hard to see the extent of the violence. And I think that really came through with Fatemeh's writing too, which is why I really appreciated reading from her point of view. Because a lot of times when you were just visiting, it was just annoying, which you talk about too. Like, it's so hot. Like, why do I have to put this thing on? This is so dumb. And a lot of times you feel comfortable just talking back to people, which Iranians do too. But it's not just daily annoyances. It's like such violence that they are confronted with. And I think that for me was really illuminating to read a firsthand account of that kind of violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know, how was your experience of like kind of how you felt about when you would visit Iran versus like what you were reading about in the later years? Did you have that same experience?
Well, I was so young the times that I went. And so, but I did find it like there was frustrations that I had as a kid. And just like it's not as if when I went to Iran, my mom said, okay, here's what you're going to expect. Like there is gender segregation. All I heard was it's different than Canada. That's really the
Right,
only.
right.
So I wasn't necessarily prepped because also like it's also my mom's first time taking me back, right? It's like first time for everything. So I just kind of was thrown in there and figuring it out. And what I observed was just it was just confusing as a kid. I was like, how come I don't see women on the back of motorbikes? How come it's 35 degrees Celsius and everyone's covered head to toe? And why do I have to wear a hijab while I'm eating? Can't you tell that's so annoying to do? And really, like the experience that solidified it to me is I went to the passport office as a young girl to get my passport renewed in Iran. And I went there and you had to wear the maghne, like the very conservative hijab that most young girls wear to go to school. Where before, when I was a kid in public, I might just like kind of toss something over my head, like in a very chic way that I saw like other chic women in Tehran do. But this time, this was very constricting and tight. And I went into this passport office and I had never seen police with like huge automatic rifles covering their whole body. And so I
Wow.
just remember looking up at this guy, just staring at him because I was shocked, right? And then he got in my face and he said, "Why are your toes out?" Because I was wearing flip flops. And I just, like, my toes were red. He's like, "Why are your toes out? It's un-Islamic." And la la la. And he's like getting very close to me. And I had never had that experience. I'm a tiny 10-year-old, like I'm tiny. And my cousin, who had always been like, Shireen, my cousin, was like much more Shireen, like not as rough around the edges as me, like really sweet, like very Tarofi. But she moved in between us and she got in his face, same age as me. She's a week younger than
Wow.
me. But she got in his face, was like, "My cousin's a guest. She's from Canada. Don't you know that's not how we treat guests here?" And like that,
Wow.
it's so Iranian. It's like, it's kind of like
Yes.
now getting to his sense of Iranianness. This is not how we treat guests in our country. And then he just kind of backed off and she turned around to me. She's like, "Don't act like a little mouse. Like you can't act like a little mouse here." And I was like, I've never been called a mouse in my life. Like I didn't, so that I think was an experience where I was like, okay, like Shireen might seem really Shireen, but like she's hard when it's time to be. Like you see that with so many people in Iran for sure.
Yes. And you see that with Fatemeh especially.
Yeah, because it's like you have to be. There's no other means of survival, but having to fight every day is a fight for people in Iran.
Right. And so now I want to get into the diaspora if we could, just for a second.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so this is on page 73 that you kind of talk about. And you don't talk too much about the diaspora, which is why I want to ask you. You said, "I had to turn my focus away from the diaspora, away from the criticism from even friends and acquaintances about the media on Iran to stay sane. So then, as long as I did right by the people in our investigations, our eyewitnesses, and our sources, I was happy. That was my measure of success, and not what I was seeing online from diaspora social media campaigns. I was seeing our people getting killed by security forces, so the diaspora infighting made me feel as if I was living in distant realities. Wasn't it clear that we weren't the enemy? Shouldn't we focus on who is being harmed? It felt like this surreal circus of secondhand trauma." This is so good. I'm going to read that again. "It felt like this surreal circus of secondhand trauma on top of the uprising that was sustaining its strength on the lives of our people who were being killed regularly by the regime." That is so good. And I feel like we are going to have to do a lot of work in the diaspora on unpacking exactly what happened then. But can you kind of go through your experience of what you're talking about when you wrote this?
Right. So as I was reporting on Iran, there was like a big Twitter campaign that was like cancel NYT, all these influencers, LA based Iran influencers. And, it's kind of like people become active and activate at different times. And there's like that's their journey. There's really no judgment.
Yes.
Whatever activates you, activates you. But it was just kind of, I was on my back foot seeing people I had never seen before coming out really against the times, while I was working really hard trying to verify footage. So that was challenging. And it also, it's like these reports are labor intensive. Like I know that people in the diaspora wanted these reports out right away, but sometimes it can take me 3 days to verify a video. Like I was working on a video in Khash in Sistan Balochistan, and I was looking at this one video where there was a highway overpass, and I thought, how many highway overpasses could there be in this city? Like there was 30. So it took me
Wow.
days to verify it. And so like these just take time. And so we put out a report the 26th of September, maybe. And that's a very fast turnaround for something like this. And that was where we did a video analysis where we verified videos and we were able to say, here are the themes that we're seeing so far. Women in the front, tearing down images of leadership, which we had never seen en masse, and widespread protests. So everywhere, like even the island of Kish, or hearing people chant Zan Zendegi Azadi, but in Kurdish, Jinjian Azadi in Tehran. So it's like we just being able to say, I'm not just verifying the videos, but I want to add a layer of analysis. Like that work takes time. And so that was really hard to do that work. And I'm like watching violent graphic imagery, and I have to, build time to step away from that, to be resilient. And so it's hard to do that while also getting like hearing this criticism. And so for me, I was like, I need to focus on what's real. This is again why I like this type of reporting. I am not focusing on opinions. I'm working with the material in front of me. I need to focus on this, and I need to talk to people in Iran and connect myself with what's going on in this moment that is the most urgent, and what's happening in the diaspora, which is like heartbreaking and also understandable. We carry a ton of trauma and grief with each other. I have to put that aside. And there was moments of reflecting where I talked to some of my friends about this. I said, why do you think, like I had close friends come up to me and say, like, why aren't you posting stuff? And I said, well, I can't post it unless I verify it. Like I'm a reporter. People come to me thinking this is news. So I need to be really intentional, right? I was talking to a friend. I said, why do you think we're at each other so much? Like it's a common feature of many diaspora groups. I was like, why do you think it's happening for us? And he said, well, I think many people see this moment as the tipping point. Maybe we can all go back. If this system is toppled or something changes, like this tiny window is our opportunity. And if we're not all together, like it's going to fail. But it's almost like the ghost of Khomeini is living within all of us, because we're saying we see who's posting, who's not posting. We're going to remember that. That's like very dictator coded, right? So it's like we, are doing the trauma that we have experienced onto each other, which is, understandable and also painful.
Right. And so that was right after it had happened. You mentioned LA based LA based activist. Why did you say it like that? Was it all based in LA, or were you seeing it from other places?
I was just seeing new people, again, like whatever gets you activated online, like that's you and that's your journey. But the voices that were really like canceled New York Times were coming from LA based folks. And so I was just like, oh, like that's just something to notice. There was no judgment, but that was just what I was seeing in that moment.
And so what have you seen since then? Like, have things changed, or has it become worse? You talk about this conference that you went to that I thought was really interesting, in Washington, D.C., where someone from Nufti was there and really misrepresented a lot of things. So how are things going with that? Like, are these people who came out of the woodworks then and were very loud voices, are they still being very loud, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen different coalitions pop up, varied views, but definitely like a pro-monarchist group is still loud and still exists. And like whether or not that has a ton of legitimacy in the country, it doesn't seem that way. It really seems to be an external voice just based on conversations that I'm having with people in the country. And then, so yeah, it's like these groups come online, they get, interesting support from other groups that you're like, is this genuine? Are you co-opting this message for your own political purpose? Like that's a question we should always be asking when groups pop up. But like there is still infighting. I think there always will be. But something that I, wish I had written about in the book is like how powerful the diaspora is in this type of reporting. Like so many of my sources came from diaspora groups, like Kurdistan Human Rights, which is an organization based in Europe that documents all human rights abuses against Kurdish people in Iran. Because of how the Islamic Republic, operates, like civil society doesn't exist in Iran in that way. And an example I'll give of that is I was working on a story in Venezuela. I found a group based in Venezuela that was documenting each person that was killed by security forces. And I was stunned. I talked to a Venezuelan journalist friend. I said, I can't believe that. I thought you were a dictatorship. And he said, well, we're a different dictatorship than Iran. Like you're living under a very specific dictatorship. And so I was like, wow, there are absolutely levels to this. And this is where Iran is. So it just like there is an incredible, like because of that, fantastic human rights workers are forced out of the country. And it's the diaspora owes everything to that diaspora group. We wouldn't know about what was going on unless, Kurdistan Human Rights Group is documenting it, or, Sistan Balochistan, we know through Halvesh, so it's like, it's really important to shout out those groups too, because it's like that.
Yeah. What are the groups that you recommend people look into or?
Yeah. So Halvesh, Haalvsh, they post mostly in Farsi. They post what happens in their community to Baloch people in Sistan Balochistan. Kurdistan Human Rights Network is fantastic. They're based in Europe. They document abuses against Kurdish people. And particularly what they've done really great work is since the Israeli strikes on Iran, we have seen so many Kurdish people that the Islamic Republic will say pretty baselessly, oh, you were colluding with Mossad, with Israel. And we're seeing this specific suppression against ethnic minorities, particularly Kurdish people. And Kurdistan Human Rights Network, like they are keeping us informed. So they're doing this incredible work that is very unsafe to do from inside Iran.
Well, it was so interesting to hear Fatemeh's experience of, she's been in the country trying to report these things, and then she comes out and is at the BBC and she has all this freedom, but then she's talking about it's not just the freedom of like reporting, talking about whatever you want, but there she like lost the freedom, or she was faced with bureaucracy and the misinterpretation of the diaspora. Like it is hard to understand the experiences of someone from a different culture. Like she talked about this like buying and trading group where at the BBC they were like, oh, it's environmental to buy used things online. Whereas she was like, no, that's not the reason that people are doing it. So I thought that was really interesting. So you too are just relying on voices from inside of Iran to understand what's happening, because even those of us who are familiar with the culture, we might not understand all of the context of something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought that was also very interesting. Well, I guess just continuing on the topic of the diaspora, what is your the book kind of ends with the end of the Freedom Life movement, or, the hope that was carried at the end of that. So what have you seen since then? I know that the Iranian government did really crack down. That was a fear in the book that there would be a huge crackdown. But I was listening to your interview with Ben Rhodes on Pod Save America about how it was during the time when Israel bombed Iran, and you were talking about how things really have improved. So can you talk a little bit about what has happened since then? Maybe give a few of the big points, and then talk about where you see Iran right now after these protests had happened.
Right. So, it's interesting. About almost a year after Gina was killed, the parliament in Iran passed this incredibly draconian law, the hijab and chastity law. And this was overwhelmingly passed in parliament. So you can see when the country says we want these restrictions lifted, the parliament says, actually, we're going to double down. And so the law was pretty scary to read the contents of it. It had things like increased lashes and fines if you didn't wear hijab. It encouraged your neighbors to almost be like a vigilante force and, kind of tell on each other, things like that. And you could lose access to public services, all this stuff. So this law.
Or it was even like if they saw you in a car without hijab on, they could like take your car, and which they did before, but
it almost seemed like sometimes you would get warnings. It was almost like we're going to use traffic cameras and AI to find faces without hijab. So like that technology aspect of it was very worrisome. And so the night before that was supposed to go into effect, we had this incredible protest from this woman named Parastu. She's a singer, and she did a concert live on YouTube. And she's defying the Islamic Republic's, decades ban on women singing in public. And she's singing in this like tube top dress. Her hair is out. She has lipstick on. Her nails are painted. And in the background, she has this like old Canaversari, I can never know how to say it, but these like old relics from the Silk Road, which to me had a very poignant meaning. You know, she's chosen this historical background for a reason. She says, like, my voice, my singing, our culture will continue. It's been here long before the Islamic Republic, and it will continue long after. So she staged this protest just by singing and expressing herself. And she's saying like revolutionary anthems. And her statement was, this is how me, like a daughter of Iran, expresses herself. It was really beautiful. And so she was, you know, immediately detained. Her band was detained and things like that. But it just shows like even just before the law is supposed to go into effect, people are staging protests. And the law never actually like went into effect, or we haven't seen yet. Women have still been harassed for not wearing hijab, fined, things like that. But this like increase of operations we haven't seen, and I think it's probably because the Islamic Republic is interested in its survival, and it knows that it has lost the legitimacy among its people. It knows that hijab is a huge issue, and that people like will put their lives on the line. They've done that before. And so there just hasn't been as much harassment or enforcement. So, you know, my friends send me pictures of when they're at cafes or art shows, and they're just out with their hair is out. Like their hijab isn't even on their shoulders to put it up quickly if they see an officer. But each day a woman is out in Iran without hijab, that's an active daily protest. Because the rules of hijab haven't changed, if only they try to enforce it to make it stronger. But this continued activism shows a success of the movement. Because I think it's really difficult to say the movement succeeds if it topples the government. That's a really tough sell, right? Especially when you think about the context of the Islamic Republic, its surveillance, its squashing of civil society. The brightest minds, labor activists in Iran are arrested and put into Evin, right? So it's like, it's a really difficult climate to be an activist and to push for change. So these little, what might seem to us like little changes, but people, you know, died for, like these are really important things for us to note as we watch and see what happens next in our country.
So are you feeling like people feel more hopeful in Iran right now?
I wouldn't say right now there's a feeling of hope because the context has changed. Like there's a feeling of hope in the sense of many of the women that I spoke with in 2022 continue to say we won't go back. Like that defiance, I think, is there, and that's really important. But the context is a little bit different in Iran, right? So Iran experienced 12 days of airstrikes, heavy Israeli airstrikes in Tehran, many parts of the country. Over 1,000 civilians were killed. And sanctions have now snapped back. So the economic situation is continuing to, you know, get worse. The value of the rial is continuing to go down. So I don't see, like one of my cousins said to me, like, بیچاره مردم ایران, like, وسط هستیم. حمله شدیم از دست جمهوری اسلامی، حمله شدیم از دست اسرائیل. Like, we're stuck in the middle. We're getting hit with the government and we're getting hit by Israel. Like, so I think it's that feeling of like helpless limbo absolutely exists in society right now.
So during that 12 days war, there was a lot of footage coming out too from Iran. There was in particular a video of the Evin prison being bombed. Can you tell me about your experience as a forensic analyst of that video? Like when you first saw it, and then it has now come out that it's completely just an AI video. Did you know that at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I remember first seeing that black and white video that it was like pushed a lot by Israeli channels. Like I saw that in my feeds and they said Evin was just bombed. And it didn't look real from the outset to me because it's this huge impact of the gate. And you see this very skinny tree in the background that barely moves. And I thought, that's strange. You know, that's strange to me. I watched it a few times. And then I also thought, like, you would really have to be in the right place at the right time to film that. Like, that's a really iconic image. And if it's such a big impact and someone's by the gates, surely you'd be blown back. So I was having moments of skepticism as an observer. And then I just started to do a little bit of research. So I looked at the last available satellite imagery. What does the gate look like? Okay, well, the shrubbery looks very different than the image I'm seeing pushed out. So this video has been manipulated. We can't use it. But I knew that Evin prison was hit with airstrikes because I was seeing different reports of it. So there was different Telegram channels I was following where eyewitnesses would say, we heard this explosion, because there's residences all around Evin. Like it's a pretty upscale neighborhood now in Tehran. So many people just live there. And I had reports of people that said, my family friend was in this apartment building. They're the only survivor. So I kind of knew this was happening. And so what we relied on to take a look at the damage of Evin prison was satellite imagery. So Evin, Tehran is imaged quite often by satellite imagery providers, particularly as this was towards the end of the conflict. There was a lot of, imaging of the area. And so we were able to look at satellite imagery and see the points of impact. And so what we did was we took the satellite imagery and we took it to a few sources. I took it to people that had just been imprisoned in Evin, who were they were prisoners who were able to kind of move through the compound. So if you're taken by the Ministry of Intelligence or the intelligence wing of Sepah, you are separated from the general population. You might be blindfolded, might be in solitary. But there are other people who are like activists, like more so regular prisoners. I don't know how to put it. Less high value, like not as political, that come through that can move around. So I spoke with a couple of people who, knew Evin like the back of their hand and could tell me, this is the hospital. This is the salon where families would come and visit their loved ones. I mean, the prison was bombed during visitor hours, which is really horrific. And so, yeah, they were able to point out what was damaged, which was really helpful. And then we also took that imagery to people that were explosive ordnance experts and satellite imagery experts that could tell us this was hit with multiple munitions. So it was hit between 4 and 6 times. And so Israel's justification. They came out and this was what they said was the heaviest day of bombings in Tehran. They said we're taking out symbols. Evin is a symbol of oppression. And it just seemed like, it just seemed like, again, like the poor Iranians who are caught, who think about being a prisoner in Evin, right? Like your day is very, you talk to people who have been incarcerated anywhere. Routine is very important. Like it's a way that you get through your day. All of a sudden your routine is impacted by this airstrike. There is no information. People that I talked to that had loved ones in prison said that my family member, my friend hasn't eaten for weeks. It was an extreme stressor for people. And someone I talked to who was formerly incarcerated in Evin, he said, you dream of it all the time. Like you're sitting in Evin, you're like, oh, one day the people are going to knock down this gate. This is going to be amazing. But it wasn't at the hands of the people. And I was very disoriented. Like this was crazy. And I also said to them, what do you think of this being bombed as a symbol? And they said, well, what do you mean? Like you're bombing people. Like if you want to bomb a symbol, bomb the Tehran prosecutor's office where these judges are that hand down the harshest sentences. There would still be civilian killed, but maybe that would make more sense. But there are so many civilians and people who are doing time. And it's like, if you think about if Israel was saying we were trying to, free political prisoners, maybe like these political prisoners are often blindfolded and held. So it's like it was an airstrike that didn't make sense the more that we looked into it. And it was a really challenging story to report because right away we knew there were civilians killed, right? There was visitor hour. There was a woman, Mehrangiz, who lived there who just happened to be walking by and was killed perhaps by the blast wave. There was a woman who's a social worker. Her young son was brought to prison because she was doing her work and he was killed. So, yeah, it was a really heartbreaking story.
So then with that, with all this misinformation going around, what is your suggestion to people of the diaspora to be like discerning viewers? And in general, do you have any nasihat for the diaspora today of how to be, I guess at the end, Fatemeh leaves and she has a lot of misgivings about that. Like, should she leave or not? And they tell her, you're best served as a voice for us, for the people inside of Iran. And we hear that a lot. So what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be a voice for the people inside Iran practically for us in the diaspora?
Yeah, I think it's really keeping the conversation and what we share centered on the experiences of Iranians. We're going to have an emotional reaction to it because it is a specific type of pain to watch your people go through so much hardship and be harmed at the hands of so many actors. Like that's really difficult for us to watch. And I think it brings up a frenzy that people in the country don't feel. Like that's an experience we're having. So I think it's just taking a beat from that and making sure that we're focusing on what's happening, platforming voices from inside of Iran, and also just showing a kindness to each other. We all come into this space with so much that we inherited. We inherited a political legacy, an apolitical legacy. Like we've all experienced different facets of being Iranian, and just like showing a kindness to each other in that moment as much as we can, I think is helpful. And like getting to know people in the space of reporting that put out verified content. So like I work pretty exclusively in the open source space on the visual forensics team at the Post, and I concentrated on Iran. There's, BBC Verify. They're great. Shayan is a fantastic, fact checker, reporter. He works a lot with manipulated media. Like just finding people that are verifying these moments, I think is really key, because there are, I mean, I think there's probably a handful of us that do it in the Iran space. But just kind of like knowing that and knowing that that information is reliable, because we go to great lengths of like watching a video for days, trying to pinpoint it so that we can share it. Yeah, I think just knowing those lanes of information is really important.
Wonderful. Well, Nidujan, I think there's a lot we can talk about this, but I also want to point out, like in the book, it's not just about what's happening now. There's a lot of like historical context that's in there. Like I didn't know the exact history of like the IRGC, and you get into that, and the talk about the minorities of Iran. There's actually a really beautiful thing that you say that I wanted, another quote that I wanted to read if I can find it quickly. This is from a section, and the book is broken up into chapters marked as you or Fatemeh, so from your different perspectives. So it's really nice the way that they're interwoven. This is one of yours where you say, whenever our calls hangs in the moment of stillness, Fatemeh reminds me of our dreams. We will go back to Iran one day, we will open a journalism school, and we will create a space for minority languages that have effectively been banned from formal education. I love that. I love that you brought it back to that. We hear so much about the minority groups of Iran in this book, which are so important and so often overlooked. The Islamic Republic does a really good job of overlooking them. And I think that there needs to be a lot more talk of that in the diaspora as well, because that's something like your experience, your parents speak Azeri. That's a lot been lost in our generation. I actually get asked that a lot with trying conversation. People are like, well, do you teach like Desfuli? And I'm like, oh man, if only I could have a little different program. It's like hard enough to find any resource to teach Persian, let alone like all these beautiful minority languages we have. I don't know what's going to happen to that in the future. I think a lot of that is being lost. So I really appreciate that you guys talk about that as well in the book. And if is there any other last thing that you want to say that we haven't covered?
No, I just want to say thank you. Like I really appreciate your time and your close reading, and I hope that, this, like our world, as you said at the outset, like it's very heavy. This was a very heavy time for our people. It continues to feel heavy, but I hope that this book gives people a sense of optimism, because we talk about what the future might look like. And also just, I think even the historical provides me comfort.
Yeah,
Our
sure.
people have fought so much over centuries, and this is just another fight. And like there is so much resilience in our people, and I think that makes me really hopeful, and I hope that makes you hopeful too.
Absolutely. And it's not all doom and gloom and difficulty. There is also a little romance in here that's really fun. So I appreciate that. There's a little past lives vibe in there as well. Have you watched that movie?
Oh yes, I saw Past Lives. I was like, oh my God, who made a film about me and Milad? That is crazy.
So sweet. So that's in there too. So if you don't come for the historical references, come for the romance. Nilujan, thank you so much. And everyone go get the book. I will link to, or where is the best place for people to find you? Let's ask that.
You can find me on Twitter at Tabrizy or X, or on Instagram. I'm Bad Boys to Men in Black Hawk Down, which is more fun. So you can find me there. I'm very on the internet.
We'll link to all that in the book, and I hope that everyone reads it and read all of Nilu's reporting still. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Merci, Leyla John.